On the night of November 13, 1933, 20,000 people packed Berlin's Sportpalast. For a rally of the German Christians, the Nazi movement's official church faction. A district leader named Reinhard Krauss took the stage. And told the crowd it was time to throw out the Old Testament entirely. He called it a collection of tales of cattle merchants and pimps. He proposed rewriting the New Testament too. Stripping it down until the teachings of Jesus lined up perfectly with National Socialism. It was too much, too soon, and too public. Within days, the regime's own hand-picked Reich Bishop was forced to stand up and publicly disown him. The Nazi press called it an embarrassment. Krauss was suspended. To most people watching, it looked like the fringe had overreached. And the party had reined it in. That was the reading the party leaders wanted everyone to believe. It was also a lie. Because 8 years later, in secret, the regime's own chief ideologist would draft a document that made Krauss's rejected speech look cautious by comparison. The story of how the Nazis went from denying that they had any qualms with religion to writing the hatred of religion into policy in private. Is the story of how Hitler himself came to power. Go back to 1920. When the party first wrote down what it stood for, religion got exactly one line in their policy document. Article 24 of its founding program promised liberty for all religious denominations in the state, so long as they didn't threaten the moral feelings of the German race. It was written to sound tolerant to a Catholic voter and tolerant to a Protestant voter at the same time, while committing to nothing at all. It was a placeholder for what was immediately yet to come. For the first months after Hitler took power in 1933, the strategy was absorption. Germany's Protestants were already fractured, 28 separate Lutheran and Reformed churches with no single hierarchy the way Catholics had in Rome. The Nazis saw an opening with that. A new pro-Nazi faction calling itself the German Christians, pushed to fuse every Protestant church in the country into a single Reich church, built around racial doctrine and the Führer principle. With a Hitler loyalist named Ludwig Müller installed at the top as Reich Bishop. Hitler sent the SA and the Gestapo after uncooperative clergy. And personally went on the radio urging Germans to accept and join in the German Christian. Müller won a rigged synod that September, in the same town where Martin Luther had once nailed his theses to a door, or supposedly so. That was the machinery already in motion when Krauss took the podium in November 1933 and said the quiet part out loud. And it explains why the walkback happened. Hitler's own private opinion of the Protestant clergy he was courting was contemptuous. He told his aides they were insignificant little people, submissive as dogs, people he could do anything he wanted with. He didn't need to convert them by argument. He needed them compliant. And a public relations disaster over the Old Testament wasn't worth the trouble it would cause while the regime still needed the appearance of religious tolerance to consolidate power elsewhere. But not every pastor went along quietly. A former U-boat commander named Martin Niemöller had welcomed Hitler's rise in 1933. His own memoir had been a bestseller in the Nazi press that year, the story of a war hero turned man of God. But Niemöller broke with the regime almost immediately over the church takeover. And by early 1934 he had become the face of a rival movement calling itself the Confessional Church, which declared itself the only legitimate Protestant church in Germany and refused to recognize Müller's authority. In 1936 Niemöller's group sent Hitler a formal memorandum protesting the regime's anti-Semitism and demanding the state stay out of church affairs. The response was immediate and brutal. Hundreds of confessional church pastors arrested, its funds seized. One of the memorandum's signers was taken to and murdered in a concentration camp. Niemöller kept preaching anyway. In his last sermon before his own arrest, on June 27, 1937, he told his congregation that Christians could no more escape the reach of the authorities than the apostles could. And that when the state and God gave contradictory orders, we must obey God rather than man. 4 days later he was arrested. He was eventually acquitted of the main charge against him, fined, and sentenced to time he'd already served. And the moment he walked out of the courtroom a free man, the Gestapo seized him again. He spent the next 7 years in Sachsenhausen and then Dachau, and was only freed when Allied troops liberated the camps in 1945. By then the mask was mostly gone anyway. In February 1937, with the church conflict still on, the Nazi Minister for Church Affairs, Hans Kerrl, gave a speech to a room of churchmen that dropped the pretense of Article 24 entirely. Positive Christianity, he told them, wasn't compatible with the old creeds, it simply was just National Socialism. He mocked the idea that Christianity meant faith in Christ as the Son of God. The party, he said, represented the real Christianity now, and the Führer is the herald of a new revelation. For years earlier a man had been publicly disgraced for saying something similar too plainly at a rally. Now a cabinet minister was saying it as settled doctrine to the Christians cause the power had been consolidated. It kept escalating. In 1941, Hitler's own private secretary, Martin Bormann, one of the men with the most direct access to him, stated in public what had been the unspoken plan all along. National Socialism and Christianity are irreconcilable. And sometime during the war, Alfred Rosenberg, the party's self-styled chief philosopher, a committed pagan who held the official title of the Führer's delegate for ideological education, put that irreconcilability into policy. He drafted a 30-point blueprint for the National Reich Church, meant to take effect once the war was won. Point 5 declared the National Church's intent to exterminate irrevocably what it called the foreign Christian faith imported into Germany centuries earlier. Point 13 demanded the immediate end of all Bible publishing and distribution in the country. Point 18 ordered every crucifix, Bible, and image of a saint cleared from church altars. Point 19 specified exactly what should replace them: Hitler's Mein Kampf, laid on the altar as the nation's most sacred text, with a sword placed beside it. And every cross was to come down from every church, cathedral, and chapel in Germany, and in its place would go the swastika. That was the finished version of the idea blurted out at the Sportpalast in 1933, and he was not wrong. He was just early. The men who disowned him in front of the cameras were the same men working toward the same conclusion. It's worth sitting with how little resistance any of this actually produced. A few thousand pastors and priests were arrested over the course of the decade. Most of the country never lost sleep over it. What held the loyalty of ordinary Germans through all of this wasn't theology, it was jobs, rebuilt prosperity, and a string of foreign policy wins that made the regime look unstoppable. The war against religion in Germany wasn't stopped by public outrage. It was interrupted by military defeat. Before Rosenberg's 30 points ever got the chance to materialize. If you liked this, please share and subscribe because we drop a new detailed twist to the main figures of Third Reich that you have probably not heard before.